Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves stepped off the C-130 transport at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, her Marine Corps duffel slung over her shoulder and her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The humid summer air hit her face like a wet blanket as she surveyed the sprawling Joint Special Operations Command base stretching out before her. Somewhere beyond those distant buildings, America's most elite warriors trained for missions that would never make the news. Operations that existed only in classified files and whispered conversations. She'd earned this assignment through blood, sweat, and an unwavering refusal to accept limitations. 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan's Helmand province, where she'd learned that survival wasn't about size or strength, it was about speed, precision, and the ability to make split-second decisions while bullets cracked overhead. Countless hours in dojos and training halls, perfecting techniques until they became muscle memory. 3 years as a Marine Corps martial arts program instructor, where she trained everyone from raw recruits to hardened infantry Marines. And now this, a coveted slot in the Joint Special Operations Inter-Service Training Program, where she'd be teaching hand-to-hand combat to Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Air Force pararescue, and the most elite operators in the American military. The weight of it settled on her shoulders as she walked toward the main briefing facility. She was one of only 3 women selected for the program and the only female lead instructor. Maya knew what that meant. She'd be under a microscope, every move scrutinized, every mistake magnified. One slip-up wouldn't just reflect on her, it would be used as evidence that women didn't belong in these spaces at all. The briefing room was already packed when she entered. Rows of folding chairs held what looked like a catalog of military masculinity. Broad shoulders, thick beards, muscled forearms covered in tactical tattoos, eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. The air itself seemed charged with testosterone and barely contained energy. Conversations died mid-sentence as she made her way down the aisle, her boots echoing on the tile floor. She could feel the assessment happening, the silent questions being asked. Maya had learned long ago not to shrink under scrutiny. She kept her spine straight, her gaze forward, her expression neutral and professional. She'd faced down Taliban fighters. She could handle a room full of curious operators. But as she found a seat in the 3rd row, she heard it, a voice from the back dripping with disdain. They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now. Low enough to maintain plausible deniability, loud enough to make sure she heard it. A few chuckles followed. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she pulled out her notebook and reviewed her training outline, focusing on the material she'd spent weeks perfecting. Let them laugh now. They'd see soon enough. The commanding officer entered, Colonel Richard Hayes, a grizzled Army Special Forces veteran with a chest full of ribbons and a reputation for running the tightest training program in SOCOM. The room snapped to attention. Hayes wasted no time on pleasantries. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform, "and ladies, welcome to the Inter-Service Advanced Combat Training Program. For the next 12 weeks, you will train together, learn from each other, and hopefully develop the kind of cross-service cooperation that saves lives in the field." He clicked a remote, and a PowerPoint slide appeared behind him, showing the instructor roster. Leading our hand-to-hand combat in close-quarters battle curriculum will be Marine Corps Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves. Her photo appeared on the screen, dressed blues, stoic expression, the bronze star with valor visible among her ribbons. Staff Sergeant Reeves has 2 combat deployments, over 500 confirmed training hours in multiple martial arts disciplines, and is currently ranked as a black belt instructor in the Marine Corps martial arts program. She comes highly recommended by MARSOC Command. Maya noticed several operators nodding with respect, but in her peripheral vision, she caught the reaction from the back row. The man who'd made the earlier comment, a broad-shouldered Navy SEAL with cold blue eyes and a perfectly groomed beard. He leaned over to his buddy. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the smirk, the dismissive hand gesture, the way his companion glanced her way and shook his head. Colonel Hayes continued outlining the program structure, but Maya found herself studying the SEAL in her peripheral vision. There was something in his body language that went beyond simple skepticism.
This was personal animosity, and they'd never even spoken. She'd seen it before. Men who interpreted a woman's presence as somehow diminishing their own accomplishments, as if excellence was a finite resource that had to be hoarded. As the briefing concluded, operators began filing out, some casting curious glances her way. Maya gathered her materials methodically, refusing to rush or appear affected. She was reaching for her bag when a shadow fell across her seat. Staff Sergeant Reeves. She looked up into the weathered face of a Marine captain with instructor insignia on his collar. Captain James Mitchell, fellow jarhead. Just wanted to introduce myself before tomorrow's chaos begins. They shook hands, and Maya felt some of the tension ease from her
shoulders. Good to meet you, sir. Mitchell's expression turned serious. Listen, I don't know if he's briefed you, but that SEAL who was making noise during the brief, Sergeant First Class Derek Vaughn, Team 3, he's got a reputation. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Let's just say he doesn't handle change well, especially when it challenges his worldview. 3 instructors have requested transfers in the past 2 years, partly because of him. But his combat record is stellar, so leadership tends to look the other way. Maya absorbed this information with a slight nod. Appreciate the heads up, Captain. Just watch your 6, Mitchell said quietly. And for what it's worth, I reviewed your file. You're more than qualified to be here. Don't let anyone tell you different. As Maya walked out into the fading evening light, she allowed herself a moment of doubt. Tomorrow, she'd stand in front of that room full of elite warriors and prove she belonged. Tomorrow, men like Vaughn would be looking for any excuse to discredit her. She headed toward the gym. If tomorrow was going to be a battle, she'd be ready. She always was. Maya arrived at the training facility 45 minutes early the next morning, while darkness still clung to the North Carolina sky. She needed time to prepare, to transform the sterile combat training hall into her domain. The space was impressive. Padded mats covering nearly 3,000 square feet, heavy bags suspended from reinforced ceiling mounts, a full array of training weapons locked behind glass cases along the far wall. Everything smelled of rubber, sweat, and the faint antiseptic used to clean the mats. She moved through her own warm-up routine with meditative focus, each stretch and movement deliberate. This was her ritual, the way she centered herself before any important engagement. Her body responded with familiar precision, muscles loosening, breath steadying, mind sharpening to a fine point. By the time she finished, the first rays of sunlight were streaming through the high windows, and she heard boots echoing in the hallway outside. They filed in gradually, Army Rangers moving with controlled aggression, Air Force pararescue jumpers carrying themselves with quiet confidence, Delta Force operators whose faces betrayed nothing, and finally, the Navy SEALs. Vaughn entered near the back of his group, already wearing an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. He caught her eye for a brief moment, and Maya saw the challenge there, the dismissiveness that said she'd have to prove herself with every breath. "Good morning, gentlemen," Maya called out, her voice projecting clearly across the space without shouting. Military bearing came naturally to her. She'd learned it from her father, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant, who taught her that respect wasn't given. It was earned through competence and consistency. "Find a spot on the mat. Spread out so you've got arm's length from the nearest person." They complied with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some operators looked genuinely curious, ready to learn. Others wore skeptical expressions, arms crossed, weight shifted to one hip, the universal body language of men who'd already decided this would be a waste of time. Maya began with the fundamentals, explaining her philosophy before demonstrating any techniques. "Combat isn't about being the strongest person in the fight," she said, pacing slowly in front of the assembled group. "It's about being the smartest. It's about using leverage, timing, and your opponent's own energy against them. A lot of you outweigh me by 50, 70, maybe 100 pounds. In a contest of pure strength, you'd win every time. But combat isn't a contest of strength. It's a contest of will, technique, and adaptability." "Easy to say," Vaughn's voice cut through the room. He hadn't raised his hand, hadn't waited to be called on. Harder to prove. Maya turned to face him directly, keeping her expression neutral. "You're absolutely right, Sergeant, which is why we're not just going to talk, we're going to do." She gestured to an Army Ranger in the front row, a muscular staff sergeant who looked like he bench-pressed small cars for fun. "Staff Sergeant Chen, would you mind assisting?"
Chen stepped forward, clearly game for whatever was coming. He towered over Maya by nearly 10 inches and probably outweighed her by 80 pounds. They faced each other on the mat, while the rest of the class formed a loose circle around them. "Chen's going to attempt to put me in a bear hug from behind," Maya explained. "Full strength, no holding back. I want you to see what proper technique looks like against a significant size disadvantage." She glanced at the ranger. "Ready?" "Yes, ma'am." "Go ahead." Chen moved with surprising speed for his size, closing the distance and wrapping his massive arms around Maya's torso, pinning her arms to her sides. His biceps flexed as he lifted her slightly off the ground. And for a moment it looked hopeless, a textbook demonstration of overwhelming physical superiority. Then Maya moved. It happened so fast that several operators leaned forward, trying to process what their eyes had just seen. She dropped her weight suddenly, creating just enough space to rotate her hips. Her elbow drove backward into Chen's solar plexus, not hard enough to truly hurt, but enough to make him reflexively loosen his grip. In that split second of opportunity, she ducked under his arm, pivoted behind him, and swept his legs while controlling his shoulder. Chen hit the mat with a heavy thud, and Maya had his arm locked in a submission hold before he could react. She released him immediately and helped him to his feet. Chen was grinning, rubbing his shoulder. "Damn, ma'am, that was impressive."
The room erupted in genuine applause and a few appreciative whistles. Maya noticed several operators nodding with what looked like respect, their body language shifting from skeptical to engaged. Even some of Vaughn's SEAL teammates looked impressed, but not Vaughn himself. "Jen went easy on her," he announced to the operator standing next to him, his voice pitched to Carrie. "No way that works against someone actually trying." The applause died down awkwardly. Maya heard the comment but didn't immediately respond. Instead, she moved into the next phase of instruction, breaking the technique down step by step, explaining the biomechanics of why it worked. She called on different volunteers, a Delta operator, an Air Force PJ, a Ranger corporal, and walked each one through the movement until they could execute it smoothly. Throughout the session, she demonstrated a dozen different techniques: weapon disarms, escape from various holds, strikes to vulnerable points, takedowns that relied on leverage rather than strength. Each demonstration was flawless, each explanation clear and technically precise. She moved between groups as they practiced, offering corrections and encouragement with equal measure. "Your footwork is off. Shift your weight to the front foot before you pivot. Good, but rotate your hips more to generate power. Excellent, that's exactly right." Maya watched the room gradually transform. Operators who'd entered with crossed arms were now fully engaged, working through techniques with focus and determination. Questions came frequently, and she answered each one with patience and expertise. This was what she loved about teaching. Watching the moment when understanding clicked, when a student suddenly got it and their whole face lit up with that recognition. But Vaughn remained a dark cloud in her peripheral vision. During partner drills, she watched him deliberately execute techniques incorrectly, then shrug when his partner pointed it out. When she approached to offer correction, he waved her off. "I've been doing hand-to-hand combat for 8 years, ma'am. I think I know what I'm doing." "Then you should be doing it correctly, Sergeant," Maya replied evenly. "Your stance is too narrow, which is why you're losing balance on the follow-through." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "Respectfully, ma'am, what works on a training mat and what works in actual combat are two different things. Some of us have real-world experience." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Maya felt the room's attention shift to her, waiting to see how she'd respond to the challenge. This was the moment she could escalate, put him in his place publicly, or she could de-escalate, maintain professionalism, and let her instruction speak for itself. She chose the latter. "You're absolutely right that real-world application is what matters," she said calmly, "which is why these techniques come from the Marine Corps martial arts program developed specifically from lessons learned in Iraq and Afghanistan. But if you find them inadequate, you're welcome to continue using your own methods." She moved on to the next pair of operators, leaving Vaughn standing there with a faint smirk on his face. As the session wound down, Maya called the group back to attention for a final debrief. Most of the operators looked energized, engaged, already discussing techniques among themselves. Several approached her afterward with questions or to express appreciation for the instruction. "That was outstanding, ma'am," a Delta sergeant said, shaking her hand. "Best hand-to-hand brief I've had in years." "Really appreciate the detailed breakdown," added an Air Force PJ. "Looking forward to tomorrow's session."
But as the room cleared, Maya noticed Vaughn hanging back with two of his SEAL teammates, their heads closed together in conversation. One of them glanced her way, then quickly looked away when he realized she'd noticed. Captain Mitchell appeared at her elbow, having observed the entire session from the back of the room. "Well, that went about as well as could be expected," he said quietly. "You handled Vaughn's perfectly, didn't take the bait, stayed professional, kept the focus on instruction." Maya gathered her training notes, her expression thoughtful. "He's going to be a problem." "Yeah," Mitchell agreed. "The question is, how big of a problem?" He paused, then added, "For what it's worth, you just won over about 90% of that room. Vaughn's is isolated, whether he realizes it yet or not." As Maya walked back to her quarters that evening, she replayed the day in her mind. The session had been successful by any objective measure: engaged students, effective instruction, positive feedback, but Vaughn's hostility gnawed at her. She dealt with difficult students before, but something about his animosity felt different, more personal, more persistent. She had a feeling this was just the beginning. The second week of training began with an unexpected twist. Maya arrived at the combat hall to find Vaughn already there, stretching ostentatiously in the center of the mat. He'd never been early before. In fact, he'd made a point of arriving exactly on time or a few minutes late, as if punctuality for her classes was beneath him. His presence now, alone in the space she'd come to think of as her territory, felt deliberately invasive. "Morning, ma'am," he said with exaggerated formality, not bothering to stand at attention. "Thought I'd get some extra practice in, work on my inadequate technique." Maya set down her equipment bag without rising to the bait. "Initiative is always appreciated, Sergeant. Feel free to continue." She moved to the opposite side of the room, refusing to let him dictate the tone of her morning.
As other operators filtered in, Maya noticed a shift in the dynamics. Several of Vaughn's SEAL teammates who'd been warming up to her instruction now kept their distance, their body language closed off. During the previous day's afternoon session, these same men had been engaged and respectful. Something had changed overnight. The morning's lesson focused on knife defense, critical skills that could mean the difference between life and death in close-quarters combat. Maya demonstrated the techniques with her usual precision, using Captain Mitchell as her partner. The majority of the class remained attentive and engaged, but Vaughn's group had positioned themselves in the back, going through the motions with visible disinterest. "The key is redirecting the blade away from your center line," Maya explained, moving through the sequence in slow motion. "You're not trying to overpower the attacker. You're using their momentum and commitment to the strike against them." "Assuming the attacker is incompetent enough to telegraph their movements," Vaughn said loudly, not bothering to raise his hand. "Real knife fighters don't give you those kinds of openings." Maya paused, considering her response carefully. This was at least the fifth interruption of the morning, each one designed to undermine her credibility. "You raise a valid point, Sergeant, which is why we'll be moving to live training scenarios this afternoon with full-speed attacks using training blades. You'll see how these techniques perform under pressure." She thought that would satisfy him, but Vaughn wasn't finished. "With all due respect, ma'am, some of us have actually been in knife fights, in Ramadi, in actual combat, not on a nice clean mat with safety equipment." The room went silent. Several operators shifted uncomfortably. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd had moments before that Taliban ambush in Helmand, when she knew violence was coming and there was no way to avoid it. "Then you understand exactly how critical proper training is," Maya replied, her voice level despite the anger simmering beneath her professional exterior. "Because in those real-world situations, muscle memory and proper technique are what keep you alive. Ego gets you killed." Vaughn's face darkened, but before he could respond, Colonel Hayes appeared in the doorway for one of his random training observations. The SEAL immediately shifted his posture to something approximating professional, and Maya smoothly continued her instruction as if nothing had happened. But it had happened, and everyone in that room knew it. The afternoon session was even worse. During the live training scenarios, Vaughn deliberately ignored safety protocols, coming in harder and faster than necessary during his attack sequences. When paired with a younger Army Ranger for defense drills, he accidentally struck the soldier hard enough to bloody his nose, then offered a dismissive apology. "Combat intensity, sir," he explained when Mitchell called him out. "Thought that's what we were going for." Maya watched it all with growing concern. This wasn't just about her anymore. Vaughn was creating an unsafe training environment for everyone. She pulled Mitchell aside during a water break.
"I need to document this," she said quietly, showing him her notes from the past week. "His behavior is escalating, and now he's putting other students at risk." Mitchell nodded grimly. "I'll back you up with my own observations. But, Maya, you need to understand, Vaughn's group at Team 3 is Captain Brad Richardson. They did 4 deployments together, saved each other's lives multiple times. Richardson will fight this tooth and nail. You'll be painted as oversensitive, unable to handle the
rough nature of special operations training, trying to ruin a good man's career because he hurt your feelings." He paused. "It's not fair, it's not right, but it's what will happen." Maya absorbed this, feeling the weight of it settle on her shoulders. "So what do I do, sir? Just let him continue disrupting training and endangering students?" "Hell no," Hayes said firmly. "You keep doing exactly what you're doing. You document everything, you maintain your professionalism, and you don't give him or anyone else ammunition to use against you. And when the time comes, and it will come, you make sure your evidence is so overwhelming that even Richardson can't ignore it." After Hayes left, Maya sat alone in the empty office, staring at her incident report. She thought about calling her father, hearing his gravelly voice telling her what she already knew, that the right path was rarely the easy one, that standing up meant accepting the consequences. Instead, she pulled up the training roster for the next day and began planning her lessons. Because whatever happened with Vaughn, her job was to train these operators to the best of her ability. That mission didn't change just because one man wanted to make her life difficult. The following morning brought a new challenge. Maya discovered that someone had spread a rumor through the SEAL teams that she'd filed a complaint trying to get Vaughn kicked out of the program because she couldn't handle his legitimate questions about her teaching methods. Several SEALs who'd been friendly before now avoided eye contact. One even pulled his buddy away when the man started to approach Maya with a question. During the midday break, Maya overheard a conversation from around the corner of the building. She recognized Vaughn's voice immediately. "Look, I'm not saying women can't serve," he was saying, his tone reasonable and measured, nothing like the hostility he showed her directly. "I'm just saying that when you put someone in a position they're not qualified for purely for political reasons, it creates problems for everyone. She's got a chip on her shoulder, and now she's trying to ruin my career because I dared to ask questions about her methods." "I don't know, man," another voice responded, one of Vaughn's teammates. "I've been in her sessions. She really knows her stuff." "Because you're going easy on her," Vaughn replied smoothly. "We all are, because we know if we go hard and she gets hurt, it'll be our asses on the line. That's not a real training environment. That's daycare with guns." Maya felt her hands clench into fists. The manipulation was masterful. Vaughn was reframing the entire situation, making himself the victim and her the problem, all while maintaining plausible deniability about his own behavior. She turned the corner, and both SEALs immediately fell silent. Vaughn's expression shifted to one of polite neutrality. "Ma'am," he said with a nod. "Sergeant," Maya replied evenly. "Just wanted to remind you that the afternoon session starts in 15 minutes. We're covering combat scenarios in confined spaces. Should be right up your alley, given your extensive real-world experience." She let just enough edge creep into her voice on those last words to make her point clear. As she walked away, she heard Vaughn mutter something to his companion, followed by low laughter. That afternoon's training would prove to be a turning point, though not in the way anyone expected. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Bragg as operators gathered for what Colonel Hayes had announced as a morale and team-building exercise. Open sparring sessions designed to foster friendly competition across service branches. The outdoor combat pit had been prepared, its sandy surface raked, surrounded by a low barrier that kept spectators at a safe distance. Word had spread through the special operations community, and the crowd was larger than usual. At least 70 operators had shown up to watch, their faces eager for the kind of raw competition that reminded them why they'd pushed themselves to join the elite in the first place. Maya stood at the edge of the pit, stretching her shoulders and rolling her neck to loosen the tension that had been building there for weeks. She'd known this moment was coming from the instant Hayes announced the sparring session. Vaughn wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to publicly humiliate her, to prove once and for all that she didn't belong in his world. The first few matches were entertaining. A Ranger against a Delta operator. 2 SEALs from different teams going at it with the kind of competitive intensity that came from friendly rivalry.
an Air Force PJ surprising everyone by submitting an Army Special Forces sergeant twice his size. The crowd cheered and jeered in equal measure, the atmosphere electric with the kind of camaraderie that could only exist among warriors who understood what they asked of each other. Captain Mitchell appeared at Maya's elbow, his expression concerned. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Nobody's going to think less of you if you sit this one out." "Yes, they will," Maya replied, her eyes fixed on the pit where two operators were circling each other. "And more importantly—"
But something worse. Absolute confidence. He believed he was about to end this once and for all. "We've got a special matchup next," Colonel Hayes announced, stepping into the center of the pit. The crowd fell silent, sensing something significant was about to happen. Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves, United States Marine Corps versus Sergeant First Class Derek Vaughn, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. Standard rules apply. Submission, knockout, or tap out. This is training, people, not a blood sport. We're all on the same team here. But as Maya climbed over the barrier and dropped into the pit, she knew this was anything but standard training. This was a reckoning that had been building since the moment she'd stepped onto this base. The crowd pressed closer, operators jostling for better viewing positions. She could hear side bets being made, odds being calculated. They met in the center of the pit, and for the first time, Maya was close enough to see the details of Vaughn's face, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the flecks of gray in his beard, the network of fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into hostile deserts and mountains. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd realized, probably in his late 30s, a veteran of a different era of warfare. "Last chance to back out gracefully," Vaughn said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Same to you," Maya replied calmly. Colonel Hayes stepped between them, his voice carrying authority. "I want a clean fight. Respect your opponent, respect the craft, respect yourselves." "Understood." "Yes, sir," they answered in unison. Hayes backed away. The pit fell silent, except for the rustle of wind through nearby trees and the distant sound of helicopters on the flight line. Maya found her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced, hands up but relaxed. Years of training had taught her that tension was the enemy of speed. Vaughn moved first, as she knew he would. His ego wouldn't allow him to be patient, to feel out an opponent before engaging. He came forward aggressively, throwing a probing jab that Maya slipped easily. She didn't counter, just reset her position, her eyes tracking his movements. "Come on," someone shouted from the crowd. "Engage!" Vaughn pressed forward, throwing combinations now. Jab, cross, hook, real power behind them, meant to overwhelm. Maya moved like water flowing around the strikes, making him miss by inches. She could see his frustration building, see the way his jaw tightened with each punch that found only air. "Stop running and fight," Vaughn snarled, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Several operators laughed, but others, the more experienced fighters, watching her footwork with appreciation. They understood what she was doing. Vaughn lunged forward with a heavy overhand right, committing his weight. Maya sidestepped and popped him with a quick jab to the ribs as he passed. Not hard enough to hurt, just enough to score the point. The crowd murmured first blood, in a manner of speaking. Now Vaughn's face flushed red. He'd been made to look foolish, and his pride couldn't tolerate it. He came at her harder, faster, technique giving way to aggression. This was what Maya had been waiting for, the moment of emotion overrode training. He threw a wild hook, overextending. Maya ducked under it and drove a hard kick into his leg, buckling his knee. Vaughn stumbled but recovered quickly, his breathing heavier now. Sweat had begun to darken his shirt. "That all you got?" he taunted, but Maya heard the edge in his voice. He was starting to realize this wouldn't be the easy victory he'd anticipated. They circled each other, the crowd's noise fading into background static as Maya entered that focused state where time seemed to slow. She could see everything, the slight favor Vaughn was giving his left leg where she'd kicked it, the way he dropped his right hand a fraction of a second before throwing his left jab, the pattern emerging in his attacks. Vaughn feinted high and shot in for a takedown, trying to use his size and strength advantage. His wrestling was solid.
Maya felt the power in his grip as he caught her waist. But she'd anticipated it, sprawling her legs back and driving her weight down, using her hips to prevent him from completing the takedown. "Just give up," he grunted, trying to lift her. "You can't win this." Instead of answering, Maya waited for him to commit fully to the lift, then used his own momentum to roll him over her hip. They hit the sand together, a tangle of limbs, each fighting for position. The crowd roared. This was what they'd come to see. Real combat, real technique, the kind of struggle that revealed character. They broke apart and scrambled to their feet. Both were breathing hard now, covered in sand, fully engaged in the ancient dance of combat. Maya felt alive in a way she hadn't since her last deployment. Every sense heightened, every muscle responding with perfect precision. "You're better than I thought," Vaughn admitted, circling left. "But it doesn't matter. Sooner or later you're going to make a mistake, and when you do," he never finished the sentence. Instead, he exploded forward with everything he had, throwing a massive overhand right while screaming, "I'm a Navy SEAL!" as if his status alone should be enough to end the fight. It was the opening Maya had been waiting for, the moment of absolute commitment when ego and emotion completely overrode tactical thinking.
The punch had power, had intention, but it was telegraphed so obviously that she had an eternity to react. Maya sidestepped the punch by mere inches, feeling the air displacement as Vaughn's fist passed her face. In the same fluid motion, she drove a perfect palm heel strike into his solar plexus. Not his throat, not his face, but the spot where she could knock the wind out of him without causing serious injury. The strike landed with a meaty thud, and she felt Vaughn's body react, his diaphragm spasming as the air rushed out of his lungs. But she wasn't finished. As Vaughn's upper body folded forward from the impact, Maya pivoted on her rear foot and swept his lead leg with precise timing. His feet went out from under him, and 190 pounds of seal hit the sand hard, landing flat on his back with an impact that sent up a small cloud of dust. The crowd erupted in shocked disbelief. Several operators stood with their mouths open. Others were already pulling out their phones, knowing they'd just witnessed something that would be talked about for years. Maya stood over Vaughn, her hand extended to help him up, the gesture of respect that tradition demanded. Vaughn lay there gasping like a fish out of water, his face contorted with the effort to breathe, his eyes wide with shock and humiliation. For a moment their eyes met, and Maya saw something flicker across his expression. Not just anger, but genuine disbelief that this had happened. His hand twitched toward hers, and for a second she thought he might accept the gesture, might salvage some dignity from defeat. Instead, Vaughn slapped her hand away with such force that several people in the crowd gasped. He rolled to his hands and knees, coughing, still struggling to catch his breath. Without looking at her, without acknowledging Colonel Hayes or anyone else, he pushed himself to his feet and stumbled toward the edge of the pit. "Sergeant Vaughn," Hayes's voice cracked like a whip, "you will show proper respect to your opponent." But Vaughn either didn't hear or didn't care. He climbed over the barrier and pushed through the crowd, operators stepping hastily out of his way. Maya watched him go, feeling none of the triumph she'd expected. Instead, there was only a hollow sensation in her chest and the certainty that she'd just made an enemy who wouldn't rest until he'd found a way to make her pay for this humiliation. The crowd began to disperse, operators talking excitedly about what they'd witnessed. Several approached Maya to shake her hand or offer congratulations, but she barely heard them. Her eyes were fixed on the direction Vaughn had gone, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was only just beginning. The gymnasium had been transformed into something resembling a gladiatorial arena. Word of the impending rematch had spread through Fort Bragg like wildfire, and it seemed like every operator who could get away from their duties had crammed into the space. The bleachers were packed 3 rows deep, with more personnel standing along the walls, sitting on equipment cases anywhere they could find a vantage point. Maya estimated at least 200 people had shown up. SEALs, Rangers, Delta operators, Marines, Air Force personnel, even some regular Army soldiers who'd heard the rumors and wanted to witness history. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the kind of anticipation that preceded sporting events or combat operations. This wasn't just another training exercise anymore. This had become something larger, something symbolic. The conversations happening in hushed tones throughout the crowd weren't just about 2 individuals. They were about what those individuals represented, about old guards and new realities, about who belonged in these elite spaces and who didn't.
Maya sat on a bench in the makeshift preparation area, her hands wrapped in protective tape, trying to block out the noise and focus on her breathing. Captain Mitchell sat beside her, his presence a quiet anchor in the chaos. "You know you don't have to do this," he said for what must have been the 10th time. "Vaughn's the one who demanded a rematch. You already beat him once. You've got nothing to prove." "It's not about proving anything anymore," Maya replied, flexing her fingers and testing the tape. "If I refuse, he'll spend the rest of this training cycle telling everyone I got lucky the first time, that I'm afraid to face him again. The disruption will continue, maybe get worse. This ends it one way or another." On the opposite side of the gym, Vaughn was going through an elaborate warm-up routine, shadowboxing with exaggerated movements clearly designed to intimidate. His SEAL teammates surrounded him like cornermen before a professional fight, offering encouragement and advice. Maya noticed that several of them kept glancing her way, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and something that might have been concern. Captain Hayes climbed onto the elevated mat that had been set up in the center of the gymnasium. He raised his hands for silence, and the crowd gradually quieted, though the energy remained palpable. "All right, listen up," Hayes' voice boomed across the space. "What we're about to witness is a sanctioned training match between two of the finest combatants in the United States military. I want to be absolutely clear. This is not personal vendetta. This is not settling scores. This is professional development through competitive sparring." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd with a warning look. "Anyone who treats this as anything
Other than professional training will find themselves on the first transport out of here. Am I understood?" A chorus of "yes, sir" echoed back. But everyone in that room knew Hayes was technically correct and functionally wrong. This was absolutely personal. The tension between Maya and Vaughn had become the dominant narrative of the entire training program, affecting group dynamics, creating divisions, forcing people to choose sides. One way or another, this match would determine the direction of the next several weeks. Maya climbed onto the mat, rolling her shoulders to loosen them. The elevated platform made her feel even more exposed, more on display. She could see faces in the crowd now, some supportive, some skeptical, some simply curious about what would happen when force met force. Vaughn ascended from the opposite side, and immediately Maya could see the difference from their last encounter. Gone was the cocky swagger, the dismissive arrogance. His movements were controlled, calculated. His eyes held a focus she hadn't seen before. He'd clearly spent the past week analyzing their first fight, identifying his mistakes, preparing for this moment. He'd also been talking. Maya could tell from the energy in the room that he'd been working the crowd, spinning his narrative, reframing the previous defeat as a fluke, a moment of carelessness that wouldn't be repeated. Several clusters of SEALs were watching him with the kind of loyalty that suggested he'd called in favors, reminded them of shared deployments and brotherhood bonds. They met in the center of the mat. Hayes stood between them, his weathered face grave. "Standard sparring rules. No strikes to the groin, throat, or eyes. Tap out, submission, or referee stoppage ends the match. This is training, not murder. You will conduct yourselves as professionals, representing your respective services. Questions?" Both shook their heads. "Touch gloves and return to your corners." Maya extended her wrapped hands. Vaughn met them, but instead of the traditional tap, he gripped her hands briefly, leaning in close enough that only she could hear. "I've been in real fights, in real wars," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "You have no idea what's coming." Maya didn't respond, didn't react. She simply pulled her hands back and returned to her corner, using the moment to scan his body language, looking for tells, for patterns, for anything that might give her an advantage. The referee, a senior Delta instructor Maya didn't know, checked with both corners, then raised his hand. The gymnasium fell into breathless silence. Even the HVAC system seemed to quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The hand dropped. Fight. Vaughn didn't rush in this time. He advanced methodically, his stance textbook perfect, clearly determined not to repeat his previous mistakes. He threw measured jabs, testing her defenses, trying to establish his range and timing. Maya circled laterally, staying light on her feet, refusing to let him corner her against the edge of the mat. They engaged in brief exchanges, strikes thrown and deflected, neither committing fully, both feeling each other out. The crowd remained eerily quiet, watching elite-level technique on display. These weren't bar brawlers swinging wildly. These were trained professionals demonstrating years of refined skill.
Vaughn feinted high and drove a hard kick toward Maya's lead leg. She checked it, absorbing the impact with her shin, but felt the power behind it. He was holding nothing back this time. The fight continued in this pattern, technical, controlled, both fighters showing respect for the other's abilities, even as they sought openings. 3 minutes in, Vaughn began to press harder, his combinations becoming more complex. Jab, cross, hook, low kick, flowing from striking to potential grappling setups. Maya defended well, but she was being pushed backward, giving ground. She could sense the crowd's energy shifting, heard a few cheers for Vaughn as he appeared to take control of the match. Then he made his mistake. Perhaps it was the crowd's approval, perhaps it was muscle memory from 100 previous victories, or perhaps it was simply the arrogance that had defined him from the beginning. But Vaughn's discipline cracked. He loaded up for a massive overhand right, the same telegraphed power shot that had been his downfall before. And this time, he compounded the error by shouting as he threw it, "I'm a Navy SEAL!" The words erupted from him like a battle cry, as if his service branch and reputation could somehow add kinetic energy to the strike. His entire body committed to the punch, hips rotating, weight transferring forward, arm extending with everything he had. It was a knockout blow, the kind of strike that ends fights instantly if it lands, but it was also exactly the opening Maya had been waiting for. Time seemed to crystallize, each microsecond stretching out with perfect clarity. Maya saw the punch coming as if Vaughn were moving through water. She saw his weight shift too far forward, saw the opening created by his overcommitment, saw the path to victory laid out before her like a roadmap. She moved. Her head slipped the punch by mere millimeters, so close she felt the air displacement ruffle her hair. In the same fluid motion, her hips rotated and her palm drove forward, striking Vaughn's solar plexus with surgical precision. The palm heel strike landed exactly where she intended, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but perfectly placed to trigger an involuntary diaphragm spasm that would momentarily paralyze his breathing. Vaughn's eyes went wide with shock as the air exploded from his lungs. His forward momentum carried him past Maya's position, now completely off balance.
Vulnerable, defeated before he even realized what had happened. Maya's rear leg swept forward in a perfect arc, hooking Vaughn's lead ankle at precisely the right angle. Physics and leverage did the rest. 190 pounds of Navy SEAL with horizontal, then crashed to the mat with an impact that Maya felt through her feet. The gymnasium erupted in chaos, shouts, gasps, a few whistles of appreciation for the technique, but Maya heard none of it. Her entire focus remained on Vaughn, who lay flat on his back, mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, his hands clutching at his chest as he tried desperately to remember how to breathe. Maya stood over him, not celebrating, not gloating, just waiting, watching, ready to help if the strike had done more damage than intended. The referee dropped beside Vaughn, checking his condition, and after a few agonizing seconds, Vaughn finally managed to draw a ragged breath, then another. The gymnasium fell into shocked silence as everyone processed what they'd just witnessed. It hadn't been a lucky shot, hadn't been a fluke. It had been a masterclass in technique, timing, and tactical patience, a textbook example of what happens when discipline meets arrogance. Maya extended her hand just as she had before, offering Vaughn a way to reclaim some dignity in defeat. For a long moment, Vaughn just stared up at her, his chest heaving, his face a mask of humiliation and barely contained rage. His hand twitched toward hers, and Maya felt a flicker of hope that maybe finally he would accept reality and move forward. Then his expression hardened into something ugly, something beyond mere competitive disappointment. His hand shot out, but instead of accepting her help, he slapped her extended hand away with vicious force, the crack of palm against palm audible throughout the silent gymnasium. The crowd collectively gasped. This wasn't just poor sportsmanship. This was a direct violation of every code that governed military conduct, every principle of honor and respect that bound warriors together. The morning after the fight, Maya awoke to discover that video footage of the match had spread throughout the entire special operations community.
Someone had recorded it on their phone, and now the 20-second clip of Vaughn's defeat played on loop across unofficial military social media channels, text message chains, and email threads. The caption that accompanied most versions read simply, "SEAL gets dropped by Marine instructor." By 800 hours, Maya had received 3 separate summonses, one from Colonel Hayes, one from the SOUM Inspector General's office, and one from Marine Corps headquarters at the Pentagon. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple training incident. She sat in the waiting area outside Hayes's office, her dress uniform immaculate, her posture parade ground perfect. Through the closed door, she could hear raised voices, Hayes arguing with someone on the phone, his normally measured tone sharp with frustration. When the door finally opened, his expression told her everything she needed to know. This was bad. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, come in." Hayes gestured to a chair, then closed the door firmly behind her. On his desk sat a thick folder with her name on it. "I'm going to be straight with you because you deserve that much. Sergeant First Class Vaughn filed a formal complaint at 600 hours this morning. He's claiming you used excessive force in what was supposed to be a controlled training environment. He's alleging that you deliberately targeted him with intent to injure, and that you've created a hostile work environment characterized by gender-based discrimination against male service members." Maya's jaw tightened, but kept her voice level. "Sir, that's absurd. The match was sanctioned, observed by you and 200 witnesses, and conducted under standard sparring rules." "I know that, and you know that," Hayes replied, rubbing his temples. "But Vaughn's cohort captain, Richardson, is pushing hard on this. He's claiming his sergeant has been subjected to systematic harassment and that the entire training program has been compromised by political correctness run amok." He paused, meeting her eyes. "They're calling for your immediate removal from the program and a formal investigation into your conduct." The words hit Maya like physical blows. Removal meant failure. It meant validation of every skeptic who'd claimed women couldn't handle these assignments. It meant Vaughn would have won despite losing the actual fight. "However," Hayes continued, pulling another folder from his desk, "you're not the only one who's been documenting incidents. Captain Mitchell has been filing supplementary reports on Vaughn's behavior for the past 3 weeks. And, starting yesterday afternoon, something interesting happened." He opened the folder, revealing a stack of sworn statements. 16 operators have come forward with accounts of Vaughn's conduct, insubordination, safety violations, harassment, not just of you, but other instructors and students. 3 SEALs from Team 5 described incidents where Vaughn created dangerous training situations that could have resulted in serious injury. 2 Delta operators confirmed they witnessed him deliberately ignoring safety protocols. Even 4 members of his own team submitted statements. Maya felt a surge of something between hope and vindication. They came forward voluntarily? "Not exactly," Hayes admitted. "After the match last night, Captain Mitchell and I made it clear that we were conducting a
full investigation, and that anyone with relevant information should come forward. We also made it clear that loyalty doesn't mean covering up misconduct." He leaned back in his chair. "The SEAL community is tight, Maya, but they're also professionals. Most of them know the difference between supporting a teammate and enabling toxic behavior." Over the next week, Maya found herself at the center of a bureaucratic storm. The Inspector General's investigation was thorough and invasive, examining every aspect of her conduct since arriving at Fort Bragg. They interviewed dozens of people, reviewed hours of training footage, analyzed her teaching methods and documentation practices. Throughout it all, Maya maintained her professional composure, even as the stress gnawed at her from the inside. She couldn't sleep more than 3 or 4 hours a night, her mind racing through every decision she'd made, every word she'd spoken, searching for mistakes that could be used against her. Captain Mitchell became her steady presence during the investigation, often appearing with coffee and words of encouragement. "The truth is on your side," he reminded her during a particularly difficult day of questioning. "Trust the process." But Maya had been in the military long enough to know that truth and justice didn't always align, especially when egos and reputations were on the line. The breakthrough came on day 6 of the investigation.
The review board obtained the gymnasium security camera footage from multiple angles, providing crystal-clear documentation of the entire match. The footage showed Vaughn's aggressive attack, Maya's defensive response, and most critically, Vaughn's refusal to accept her hand and his violation of basic sportsmanship protocols. But more damaging to Vaughn's case was what the investigators found when they expanded their inquiry beyond the immediate incident. His service record, while impressive in terms of combat actions, revealed a pattern of interpersonal conflicts, complaints from other service members that had been quietly resolved, and 3 previous incidents of excessive force during training that had resulted in injuries to other operators. The investigation also uncovered something that shocked even Maya. Vaughn had been referred from mandatory counseling twice in the past 18 months for what the Navy termed adjustment difficulties following his last deployment. The counseling had been recommended but never completed. The psychological evaluation that should have occurred before his assignment to the training program had been waived due to his senior leadership's intervention. On the 9th day, Maya was summoned to a formal hearing. The room was packed with senior officers from multiple services, a Marine Corps colonel, 2 Navy captains, an Army general, and the SOCOM, commanding officer. Vaughn sat at a table on the opposite side of the room with Captain Richardson beside him, both men in dress uniforms, both looking confident that rank and reputation would carry the day. The presiding officer, a stern-faced Army Brigadier General named Patricia Hawkins, called the room to order. "We are here to address formal complaints filed by both Sergeant First Class Derek Vaughn and Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves regarding incidents occurring during the Joint Special Operations Inter-Service Training Program. For the next 3 hours, the board reviewed evidence, heard testimony, and asked pointed questions of both parties. Maya answered each query directly and honestly, her responses backed up by her meticulous documentation. Vaughn, by contrast, grew increasingly agitated as the questioning continued, his answers becoming defensive and occasionally contradictory. The turning point came when General Hawkins played the gymnasium security footage in its entirety, then asked Vaughn a simple question. "Sergeant, can you explain why you refused Staff Sergeant Reeves' offered hand after the match?" Vaughn's face reddened. "Ma'am, I was still recovering from the strike. I wasn't thinking clearly." "The footage shows a deliberate slap, not a confused gesture," Hawkins replied coolly. "It also shows that you were capable of standing and walking immediately afterward, suggesting your faculties were intact. Would you like to revise your answer?" The silence that followed was devastating. When the board finally delivered its findings, the decision was swift and unequivocal. General Hawkins stood, her uniform crisp and her expression carved from granite. The room fell into absolute silence as she prepared to deliver the board's verdict. Maya could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, each beat echoing in her ears like distant thunder. Across the room, Vaughn sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. "This board has conducted a thorough review of all evidence, testimony, and documentation related to the incidents in question," Hawkins began, her voice carrying the weight of 30 decades in uniform. "We have examined security footage, interviewed witnesses, reviewed service records, and considered the arguments presented by both parties." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled officers before settling on Vaughn. "Sergeant First Class Derek Vaughn, this board finds your complaint against Staff Sergeant Reeves to be without merit. The evidence clearly demonstrates that the sparring match in question was conducted within established safety parameters, under direct supervision, and with your explicit consent and participation. Your claim of excessive force is contradicted by video evidence showing a textbook defensive technique executed with appropriate control." Vaughn's face went pale, then flushed. Crimson. Captain Richardson placed a restraining hand on his arm, as if sensing his subordinate might do something reckless. Hawkins continued, her tone growing harder.
More concerning to this board is the pattern of behavior we've uncovered during our investigation. Over the past 18 months, you have been the subject of multiple informal complaints regarding aggressive conduct, safety violations, and what can only be described as a systematic campaign of harassment against instructors and fellow operators. Your actions have created a toxic training environment and put personnel at risk. The general picked up a document from the table before her. Furthermore, we find that you violated direct orders regarding mandatory psychological counseling, failed to complete required evaluations, and demonstrated repeated insubordination toward instructors across multiple service branches. Your conduct has fallen far below the standards expected of a senior non-commissioned officer in naval special warfare. Maya watched as the reality settled over Vaughn like a physical weight. His shoulders sagged, his earlier defiance crumbling into something that looked almost like disbelief. This wasn't how the story was supposed to end for him, the decorated war hero, the legendary operator. Therefore, Hawkins declared, this board recommends the following actions. You are hereby removed from the Joint Special Operations Inter-Service Training Program effective immediately. You will undergo a comprehensive fitness for duty evaluation before being considered for any future training or operational assignments. A formal letter of reprimand will be placed in your permanent service record. Additionally, you are required to complete a mandatory professional development program focusing on leadership, teamwork, and appropriate conduct. The general's eyes narrowed. Let me be perfectly clear, Sergeant Vaughn. Your combat record is exemplary, and your service to this nation has been outstanding. But courage under fire does not excuse bullying in the training hall. Operational excellence does not justify creating hostile environments for those you serve alongside. The military you've dedicated your life to is evolving, and you have a choice: evolve with it or be left behind. She turned to Maya, and her expression softened, fractionally. Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves, this board finds that you have conducted yourself with exceptional professionalism throughout this ordeal. Your documentation was thorough, your responses to provocation were measured, and your technical performance has been outstanding. You are fully exonerated of all allegations.
Maya felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. Moreover, Hawkins continued, the Marine Corps should be commended for sending an instructor of your caliber to this program. You have not only met but exceeded the standards expected of elite military educators. The general paused, consulting another document. Effective immediately, you are awarded a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for your exemplary service in this assignment. Additionally, SOCOM headquarters has requested that you assist in developing new training protocols for the entire Special Operations community, with particular focus on professional conduct and inclusive excellence. The room erupted in muted conversation as the board members began gathering their materials. Vaughn sat frozen, staring at the table in front of him as if it might offer some escape from this reality. Captain Richardson leaned close, speaking urgently in his ear, but Vaughn didn't seem to hear him. Maya stood as General Hawkins approached, extending her hand. Well done, Staff Sergeant. I know this hasn't been easy. Thank you, ma'am, Maya replied, shaking the general's hand firmly. I just want to get back to doing my job. And you will, Hawkins assured her. But understand something. What happened here matters beyond just you and Vaughn. There are people watching, people who need to see that the system works, that competence and character matter more than politics or prejudice. You've given them that. As the hearing room emptied, Captain Mitchell appeared at Maya's side, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. Congratulations, though I have to say I never doubted the outcome. I did, Maya admitted quietly, more than once. They walked out into the bright North Carolina sunlight together, leaving Vaughn and Richardson still seated in the nearly empty room. Through the open door, Maya heard Richardson's voice, low and urgent. We'll appeal this. We'll fight it at every level. This isn't over. But it was over. Maya knew it. And somewhere beneath his anger and humiliation, Vaughn probably knew it too. The next morning, Maya returned to the training facility to find it transformed. The tension that had pervaded every session, every interaction, had lifted like morning fog, burning off under bright sun. Operators who'd been walking on eggshells around the Vaughn situation now moved with easy camaraderie. Several SEALs from Vaughn's own team approached her before the session began. "Ma'am," the senior one said, a chief petty officer named Martinez, "our team wanted to apologize. We should have spoken up sooner about Vaughn's behavior. We let loyalty blind us to what was really happening." Maya appreciated the gesture, though part of her wondered if they'd have had this conversation if the board's decision had gone differently. "What matters is that you came forward when it counted. That took courage."
"Not as much courage as you showed," Martinez replied. "You could have backed down, requested a transfer, avoided the whole mess. But you stayed and fought for what was right. That's the kind of leadership we should all aspire to." The morning session was the best Maya had conducted since arriving at Fort Bragg. Questions came freely. Techniques were practiced with genuine enthusiasm, and for the first time, she felt like she was truly part of the community, rather than an outsider being tested. During a water break, Colonel Hayes pulled her aside. "I have some news you should hear directly from me. Vaughn's been reassigned to a desk position at Coronado while he undergoes his evaluation. Richardson tried to fight it, but the decision came from above his pay grade. The SEAL community is taking this seriously. They don't want Vaughn's behavior to define their culture." Maya nodded, processing this information. Part of her felt relief. Another part felt something almost like pity. Vaughn had been a warrior, had served with distinction in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, but he'd let his ego and his inability to adapt destroy what should have been a distinguished career trajectory. "There's something else," Hayes continued. "SOCOM wants you to testify before a review panel that's examining training standards and instructor selection across all special operations programs. They're using this incident as a catalyst for broader reforms." When Maya asked when, Hayes smiled slightly. "Welcome to the big leagues, Staff Sergeant." That evening, Maya sat in her quarters writing an email to her father. She told him about the hearing, about the outcome, about the commendation, and the new assignment. But mostly, she told him about the lessons she'd learned, that standing up for yourself wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about maintaining standards, about ensuring that the next person who faced similar challenges would find a system that protected them rather than punished them for speaking up. Her father's response came an hour later, characteristically brief. "Semper Fi Marine. Your mother and I are proud. Now get back to work." Maya smiled, closed her laptop, and did exactly that. 6 months had passed since the hearing, and Fort Bragg had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Maya stood at the front of the largest training hall on base, surveying a class that would have been unimaginable when she'd first arrived. Over 100 operators filled the space. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Delta Force, Marine Raiders, Air Force Special Tactics, and, for the first time in the program's history, a significant contingent of female Special Operations personnel who'd specifically requested assignment to her training cycle. Her new course, Discipline over Ego,
the mental game of combat, had become mandatory training for all Special Operations personnel rotating through Fort Bragg. What had started as a response to one man's toxic behavior had evolved into a comprehensive curriculum that addressed leadership, tactical decision-making under stress, and the psychological resilience required for elite military service. Combat effectiveness isn't just about physical capability, Mia told the assembled operators, her voice carrying easily across the hall. It's about the ability to control your emotions, check your ego, and make sound decisions when everything inside you is screaming to do something else. The strongest warrior isn't the one who can hit the hardest. It's the one who knows when to strike and when to show restraint. She walked between the rows of seated operators, making eye contact, reading their body language. Some of you have heard the story about what happened here last year. Some of you have probably seen the video. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. What that incident taught me, taught all of us, is that real strength comes from discipline, not domination, from competence, not arrogance, from lifting up those around you, not tearing them down to make yourself feel bigger. In the third row, Maya noticed 3 SEALs from Team 3, Vaughn's former unit. They'd been among her most dedicated students over the past months, determined to prove that one man's failures didn't represent their entire community. Chief Martinez had become an informal ambassador, encouraging other SEALs to approach Maya's instruction with open minds rather than defensive postures. After the morning session, a young Army Ranger corporal approached hesitantly,
She was one of the handful of female rangers who'd graduated from the notoriously difficult selection course, and Maya recognized the uncertain expression on her face. She'd warned it herself not long ago. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you," the ranger said quietly. "I've been dealing with someone in my unit who's been making things difficult. Nothing as extreme as what you faced, but enough to make me question whether I belong. Hearing your story, seeing you here teaching, it reminds me that I earned my place just like everyone else." Maya placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "You did earn it. Don't let anyone make you forget that. And if the situation escalates, document everything and use the proper channels. The system doesn't always work quickly, but it does work, especially now that more people are willing to hold each other accountable." Later that afternoon, Maya met with a planning committee developing training standards for the next generation of special operations instructors. The group included representatives from every branch, and their mission was to ensure that what happened with Vaughn could never happen again, or at least that when it did happen, there would be clear protocols for addressing it swiftly and effectively. The key is creating a culture where calling out toxic behavior is seen as protecting the team, not betraying it, Maya explained during the meeting. Loyalty is important, but it can't be blind. Real loyalty means holding each other to the highest standards, even when it's uncomfortable. A Navy captain Maya didn't recognize spoke up. "Staff Sergeant, I wonder if you'd be willing to speak at the Naval Special Warfare Command's annual leadership symposium next month. We're trying to address some cultural issues within the SEAL teams, and your perspective would be valuable." Maya agreed, recognizing the significance of the invitation. The SEAL community was acknowledging that change was necessary, that the old ways of handling personnel issues behind closed doors had failed to prevent problems like Vaughn from festering. That evening, as Maya packed up her materials after a late training session, she found an envelope slipped under her office door. Inside was a brief handwritten note on Navy stationery. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, I won't pretend to understand everything that happened or claim I've changed overnight, but I've spent the past 6 months in counseling, really examining who I am and who I want to be. I'm learning that being a warrior isn't enough. You have to be a leader worth following. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trying to make excuses. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. You held up a mirror I didn't want to look into, and while I hate what I saw, I needed to see it. The Navy is giving me another chance, but in a different capacity. I'll be working with a program that helps transitioning veterans deal with the psychological challenges of leaving combat zones and re-entering regular duty. Turns out my struggles might actually help someone else. You were right about discipline mattering more than ego. Took me too long to figure that out. Respectfully, Derek Vaughn." Maya read the note twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in her desk drawer. It wasn't an apology exactly, and it didn't undo the months of harassment or the toxicity Vaughn created, but it was acknowledgement, growth, perhaps, even the beginning of redemption. She thought about responding, but decided against it. Some things didn't need a reply. Vaughn's journey was his own now, just as hers was hers. Maya turned off the lights in her office and walked out into the cool evening air. In the distance, she could hear the rhythmic cadence calls of a unit running past, the thump of rotor blades from helicopters on the flight line, the sounds of a military base alive with purpose and mission. She'd come to Fort Bragg uncertain of her welcome, braced for resistance, prepared for fight for every inch of respect. She was leaving, her rotation was ending next month, with a commendation, a legacy curriculum that would outlast her presence, and the knowledge that she'd helped shift a culture, even if only slightly. More importantly, she'd shown that excellence wasn't determined by gender, size, or loudness of voice. It was determined by competence, character, and the courage to stand firm in the face of intimidation. As Maya walked towards her quarters, she passed a group of young operators heading to the gym for evening training. One of them, a female Air Force pararescue specialist, caught her eye and nodded with unmistakable respect. Maya nodded back, recognizing the torch being passed, the path being widened for those who would come after. The fight had never really been about one arrogant sergeant. It had been about making sure that the next woman, and the woman after that, and the one after that, would find a system more willing to protect them, a culture more willing to value them, and a community more ready to accept that strength comes in many forms. Maya had fought that fight,
and she'd won something more valuable than any single victory in a training hall.